I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 Great Decisions Series, co-sponsored by Meade Public Library and the Sheboygan branch of the American Association of University Women. Each year, the association the Foreign Policy Association researches 8 timely topics and publishes a book and a CD with this information. You can order a copy of this online from the Foreign Policy Association site. AAUW is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering girls and women. Locally, AAUW gives scholarships to non-traditional women students. We sponsor candidate forums for the nonpartisan elections in April. Another project of the branch is our annual STEM event for 6th to 9th grade girls, planned to inspire them to consider careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. This year, our event is November 8th. Registration information is available on our branch website or on Facebook. In planning the Great Decision Series at Meade Library, AAUW is indebted to the work of Meade librarian Ryan Gonzalez. Where's Ryan? They're in the back. Okay. Thank you for arranging the schedule of these programs and helping with the AV setup. I would also like to thank a volunteer from WSCS, Ron Miller, and for being the cameraman this evening and taping our Great Decisions programs for viewing on WSCS. Thank you, Ron. Tonight's topic is American Foreign Policy at a Crossroads, presented by Professor Martin Farrell, retired professor from Ripon College, who recently retired after 44 years of teaching political science and international relations. 40 of those years at Ripon College. Wow, that's amazing. Professor Farrell is the author of over 70 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and conference papers, and he continues to do independent research. He has also led students on 10 study abroad experiences, beginning with China in 1981, followed by Russia, Eastern Europe, and Italy. His own travel and research have taken him to 47 countries on 6 continents. I don't know if there's anyone here who can compete with that, but I certainly can't. That's amazing. In addition to his work with students, he has served on the Fond du Lac County Board of Supervisors, from which he recently retired after 28 years. This evening, Professor Farrell will speak for 45 minutes, after which we will have a 15-minute Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and Ryan, once again in the back, has a microphone that he'll bring to you. And it's really important that you wait a second to get that microphone, because otherwise the question isn't picked up as well on the videotape that we produce. So, with that introduction, let's welcome Professor Farrell.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the AAUW for sponsoring the Great Decisions Series, and of course also to the Meade Library here. It's an honor to be back in Sheboygan. Thank you for inviting me. I'll try to keep it interesting and also within the time limit, so that we do have time for questions. This is obviously a topic that is controversial and a lot of different opinions. I want to hear what you have to say. But I also want to make sure you know how much I enjoy coming to Sheboygan. Wonderful community you have here. I we come over just for fun several times a year. The museums, and we don't even play golf. That would be a reason. The museums, the lakeshore, the restaurants, so much to offer here. And so it's really a pleasure to be back. A year ago, when these topics were announced by the Foreign Policy Association, it was a little bit up in the air. The topic was American foreign policy at the crossroads. And now, 10 months into the second Trump administration, I think we have a clearer view of what the crossroads represented, and frankly, what a radical break he has taken U.S. foreign policy. And in the course of doing that, for better or for worse, depending on our view and also how things turn out, in a radically new direction. So this evening, what I would like to do is start out, I'll talk for a while about the previous 80 years in which we had pretty much of a consensus that the U.S. would be the leading power of what we called the free world, and that we would try to preside over a rules-based liberal order. That's liberal not in the sense of Nancy Pelosi as a liberal, but liberal in the sense of free government, freely elected, free markets, civil liberties being respected, human rights being respected, global cooperation within this framework. This was the idea behind this 80-year-long strategy and approach. Those days may be over, and that is what we have to consider tonight. But if you look at the 20th century, the U.S. and its allies utterly defeated all four nations who were attempting to gain hegemony in the major world regions. So in World War I, we entered late, but we entered it with other allies to stop Imperial Germany from trying to control Europe. And then, of course, World War II, we entered with our allies to prevent Nazi Germany from conquering all of Europe, if not even much more. Also then, in World War II, Imperial Japan was trying to conquer most of Asia. And then in the Cold War, we confronted the USSR, which wanted hegemony, at least in Europe, if not more globally. We were victorious in each and every one of those cases. But what I want to emphasize in the first point is the importance of our allies. We did not do this alone. World War I, we had France and Britain on our side, important powers. Germany had only the fading Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was not much of an ally at all. And once the United States entered that war, alongside the other allies, Germany really had to give up. As far as World War II goes, again, we had great allies. If we look at the landing at D-Day, and we see it led by an American, Dwight David Eisenhower. But if we look here, out of the 5 divisions hitting the beach at Normandy on D-Day, 3 of the 5 were allies, including Canada, as well as Britain, and of course the United States. We had better allies. Germany had Italy, and in the east they had Japan, but we had the better, stronger allies, and that was instrumental in our victory. I say that because now the road we seem to be taking has disdain for our allies and pushes them away and accuses them of ripping us off, accuses us of taking advantage of them, being a parasite, or con people, conning us out of our money. This is how our allies are portrayed out of the White House today. I feel that we need to be more appreciative of what our alliances have meant, and that we need to have some loyalty and even some remembrance of our struggles together. Because even after 9/11, and flights were diverted because of the tragedy at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, In several cases, it was Canada that took our flights and took care of our people. And there are other examples that I will give you. Now, in terms of the World War II order that I said has persisted for 80 years, this was based on trying to prevent World War III. And they saw I'm not going to go in detail, the failures of the interwar period, but in the new period, they wanted to avoid these things like economic nationalism, high tariffs that impoverished countries rather than making them more economically secure. To counteract these mistakes, the new order would be based on political, economic, and military interdependence. Churchill even spoke of the need for a United States of Europe. Not nationalism, but nations cooperating, working together. And a whole series of organizations were set up, a whole network. I'm not going to go through each one. Some of them right away at the beginning, the United Nations, some later with the Paris Climate Convention, but these institutions, multilateral institutions, were an important part of preventing World War III. And then we look at economic integration, the Marshall Plan. This was $173 billion that the United States lent to the European countries in today's dollars. Was this charity? No, this was enlightened self-interest, because if everything destroyed in Europe, including not only most of the factories, but also even the farm fields had been bombed. If they are mired in poverty, they're going to be subject to political radicalism, such as communism during that era. And communist parties were quite strong in countries such as France and Italy. It was important to help them pull out of the poverty, get the factories and farms working again. They needed money to prime the pump, and the U.S. Congress and the Truman administration had the foresight to take a very big chunk of our money and lend it to them in the hope it would help rebuild them. And at the same time, the Europeans themselves saw the need for cooperation and interdependence. So the ECSC, that was the European Coal and Steel Community. That was to meld the coal and steel industries, which were big in making arms, but meld them together in the Benelux countries, France, Italy, major powers, in order to not be competing in these strategic industries, but to be working together and cooperating. That then led to the European Economic Community and ultimately to the European Union. The purpose of all of these organizations was to prevent World War III through economic integration. Our current president, President Trump, of course, has famously said, just recently, the European Union was established to screw the United States. This is the viewpoint that is taking us down a different road. We also had political cooperation, security cooperation through NATO and other organizations. Now, again, all of this was based on what I would say, not charity, but enlightened self-interest. So here we have to look at how does that viewpoint arise? Looking at it from the viewpoint of game theory, we have three different kinds of situations. So we have zero-sum situations where the total amount of wealth or benefits is fixed. So if, let's say, 5 of us went to your house, not mine, to play poker. We each brought $100. This would be low stakes I'd be playing. Okay, so there'd be a total of $500, and at the end of the night, there'd still be $500. You'd have all 500, I'd have none. But it would, because I'm not good. But the amount didn't increase, and it didn't decrease. It stayed the same. So some games, many sports events, Brewers will be playing Dodgers pretty soon. One's going to win, one's going to lose. So there's only one victory to be had. It can't, no ties, I guess, in baseball, so it can't be divided up. On the other hand, we have positive sum situations. This is where cooperation leads to an increase in wealth and value, which is then shared among the people that are contributing. Total value increases, cooperating partners share increased benefits. It's a win-win situation. And I would say an example of this is international trade. Because, for example, Canada can make aluminum more efficiently than we can. Why? Not because they have more bauxite. They actually get the bauxite from us. What they have in abundance is cheap electricity because of hydroelectrics and other things. Making aluminum requires a lot of electricity. And so we ship our bauxite to them, they transform it into aluminum, sell it back to us. They have made it more cheaply than we could have. Therefore, we then, when we buy theirs, rather than trying to make it all ourselves less efficiently, we have more money to spend on other things. So now I can get a haircut once a month rather than once every 6 months. Or let's say, whatever it is I want to spend my money on. I can buy a new car more frequently. It's a win-win situation. But then thirdly, we have negative sum. So here's when total losses accruing to all participants are greater than the gains, resulting in a net decrease in value. And what are examples of this? War. Now I understand war is still sometimes necessary. For instance, if you are determined that you're not going to live in a fascist dictatorship, you may have to go to war with Germany to prevent them taking over. But still, the amount of destruction on both sides, and we've seen this in Ukraine, the tremendous destruction, and what has been gained? Very little. Really a lot of waste. And the same, I think, can be said for Gaza, which I will talk about more a bit later. Bar fights are examples of negative sum situations. People get beat up, and I don't participate, but there's something called a prisoner's dilemma. Have any of you heard of that one in the game theory? I don't really have time to go through it all right now, but it's about two people accused of a crime. They're held in separate cells, and if neither confesses, they'll both get off. But if one confesses and the other doesn't, the one that doesn't will get the full punishment. And so what happens? They don't know what the other one is doing. They both confess. And then they both get negative consequences because they're afraid that if they don't and the other one does, they'll be blamed for it. So that's a classic game theory of negative sum situation. Chaotic, unpredictable economic policies are negative sum situations because businesses have to be able to plan, and they have to be able to have at least some prediction of their costs so that they can operate business. And if they don't know from one day to the other what the conditions are going to be, and again, tariffs and trade wars are examples of this. And obviously, you can see I'm not a fan of what's going on today. And by the way, if you disagree with me, you'll have ample time, I guarantee you, to tell me why. And I will reason very civilly with you. Why are tariffs and trade wars negative sum situations? Because they raise prices on both imported and domestically produced goods. Therefore, it's a tax on the import. So the import is less competitive. Right now, a 50% tariff on imported steel. Think about that. Yes, it may help the handful of steel companies that we have. But how many companies do we have that use steel compared to make steel? It's a ratio of about 10,000 to 1. In my community, in fact, a block from my house, Alliance Laundry makes Speed Queen washers and dryers. They use a lot of steel. They don't make any steel. The price they have to pay for all that steel is going to go up. And it's going to go up whether they pay tariff on imported steel or if they have to buy domestic, which they would have bought in the first place if it was competitively priced. They don't buy foreign steel because they hate America. They buy foreign steel because it's a better buy for them, quality for the money that they pay. And I have been there several times because as a county board chair, we helped Alliance Laundry with some economic development loans. I asked them, where do you get those big rolls of steel that you are making into the panels of your washers and dryers? They said it all depends. Who has the best steel at the best price at the time that we need it? Is there something wrong with that? But if they cannot make that choice and they have to pay more for the same or comparable steel, they have to raise their prices and they're less productive. So it's a lose situation. The producer loses, the consumer loses. And that's not even taking into account retaliation. So again, if you want an example, China right now is retaliating against the United States for the hefty tariffs imposed by President Trump by refusing to buy any of our soybeans. And I think if you followed this at all, you know what's happening to the soybean farmers. They don't know what they're going to do with their soybeans. Meanwhile, other countries like Argentina and Brazil are stepping into the vacuum. And they're upping their exports very dramatically. And we may not, again, ask the farmers, not me, we may not be able to recover those markets anytime soon. So this is why tariffs and trade wars are negative-sum situations. They reduce productivity and therefore they reduce the total value of what people's labor is producing. Okay, well, I'm moving historically now to the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989. This was the fourth great victory for the United States. We had a unipolar moment there with the U.S. as a sole global superpower, which lasted from roughly 1991 until probably about 2014, when Russia started to become resurgent and made its first incursions annexing Crimea. But I want to just again emphasize our allies and their importance even in this post-Cold War era, because Article 5 of NATO was invoked for the first time after 9/11. So all these NATO countries and others, some others too, did participate in the action countering 9/11 in Afghanistan. And if you look at the deaths, yes, the United States did have the most deaths, but other countries had a lot. So the UK, 448, Denmark, 43, maybe doesn't sound, but as a percentage of their population, it's more than what we lost. These were loyal allies coming to our aid when we were viciously attacked. Okay, now the economy, a world economy was also established. A world global economic system. These were a number of the, a number of the institutions. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but the idea was to facilitate global trade and commerce. But a lot of it was based on the dollar, and it was, these institutions, frankly, were dominated by the United States. And not everybody liked that, but that's American leadership of these global institutions. Part of the situation has been that we have dominated the global financial system for over 80 years. You could call it dollar hegemony. The role of the dollar is unparalleled in world commerce. One French president referred to this. He wasn't too happy about it. He said, the role of the dollar gives the United States an exorbitant privilege. So as you can see, almost 60% of the global foreign currency reserves are in dollars. 64% of global debt denominated in dollars. 58% of non-EU international payments are in dollars. And foreign trade invoices, over half are in dollars. The United States also leads management of the infrastructure and institutions that dominate the international financial order, such as the IMF, World Bank, SWIFT, that's the interbank payment messaging platform, and CHIPS, interbank payment clearinghouse. This U.S. domination not only confers economic advantages, but vast strategic power. So if we were to get into a conflict with China, most scholars that have studied this, including Vagel and Brooks, show that the United States, especially, again, I emphasize, working with allies, if we are united with our allies to shut China out, we could hurt them very badly, and they could not hurt us anywhere near as much. And yes, I know sanctions have not stopped Russia's war effort in Ukraine, but it's costing them between 6 and 8% of their GDP, the sanctions, each year. And that's cumulative. That's compounding, like I hope your and my investments are compounding. In other words, it's worse every year, 6%, 7%, 8% a year. So this gives us not only economic advantages, but strategic advantages. Now I am going to talk a little bit about trade. So again, if we look again on the left, this goes back to 1980. I'm sorry, it's probably hard to read, but tariffs have come down dramatically. This only goes to 2010. They continue to go down until Mr. Trump's first term. But then this is the world trade, amount of world trade. You can see it's really increasing. And over here we go much back, further back, even back to 1820. But the dark line is trade as a percentage of GDP, but the light line is GDP, total global GDP, the total sum of everybody's efforts. And we see the dramatic, and the correlation is very clear. Trade as a percentage of GDP skyrocketed after starting in the early 1970s or even mid-60s, and global GDP rose right along with it very dramatically. Increasingly free trade actually has not been a failure. And again, if you disagree, I realize it has not been equally shared, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But if you look at global GDP, you know, it's skyrocketed. It's gone way up. Just to go through some of these items, just since 1980, global international trade increased by 12 times. Not 12%, 1,200%. The total size of the global economy grew from 22 trillion to 111 trillion. That's a more than five-fold increase. For me, one of the most telling signs is in 1980, 46% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, that figure has been reduced to 8.1%, while average global lifespan has increased from 60 to 74 years. And if we kept going, if this weren't disrupted with a total destruction of the global economic system, we could bring even more people out of abject poverty. And again, how does that help us in America? If somebody is living in extreme poverty and has absolutely no money, what can they buy from us? Obviously nothing. But if they get a leg up, then they can start. In fact, it's in a different presentation. Asia is seeing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people becoming consumers for the first time. in recent years, because for the first time they actually have a little discretionary income. And they can even think about taking their clothes to the laundromat with machines made by Alliance Laundry. I don't get paid for those. I might have to talk to them about that. No, seriously, instead of washing their clothes in the river, they take them to the laundromat. And then what's the next step? They get a machine at home. Does this hurt us? What is the mentality that thinks that hurts us? I don't understand it. It helps us. Let's think of Mexico. Are we better off if Mexicans are submerged in the direst poverty imaginable? Does that help us? First of all, do you think they might try to escape that? That's one thing. And maybe we get some talented people out of that. But if you're concerned about it, keeping Mexicans poor is not the answer. And on the other hand, if they have more discretionary income, it's very easy for them to buy our products because we're right next door. Okay, foreign direct investment. That's when a foreign company invests in another country. It might buy a company or it might build a factory. If it builds a new factory, that's called greenfields. If it buys an existing company, that's called brownfields. But the United States, the amount of that has increased tremendously. Again, from 1.4 trillion to 41 trillion a year. It's a 29-fold increase since 1980. And the U.S. is the leading recipient. We get 5.4 trillion in investment every year. And we don't need special deals for that. They do that because they know we're great consumers, we're great customers. And frankly, most of those companies established their market in the United States initially through trade. So the company is selling BMWs here in the United States, and at a certain point they say, it's cheaper for us to build them in the United States than ship them over. So they build a plant. But it started with trade. Then it became investment. And we benefit from that. That's capital that we otherwise wouldn't have. Now, did all this, I've just said, is very successful on a global level? Did this really hurt the United States? This on the left is our labor force. Where's the tremendous sucking away of jobs? The jobs have been nothing but grow year after year, from 60 million in 1950 to over 170 million today. Now, where there is a downturn is where these vertical gray bars are. Those are recessions. That's when the employment is lost. And look, we took a big dip here with the pandemic. Fortunately, it was short-lived. And we recovered, and our jobs have continued to grow. That's our jobs. Here's our GDP, outstripping everybody else in the world. You know, Japan was also growing fast for a while. They then had a crash and leveled off. China, yes, has continued to grow. But we've outstripped everybody. Where's the downturn? It's not with the trade with China. It's, again, this is with the financial collapse, 2008, 2009. So some of our own problems have given us hiccups in our economic development. But it's hard for me to see how we have been taken advantage of in this whole period. And here's even a better measure, U.S. share of global GDP. And yes, it did fluctuate a bit. It was highest back around 1984, I guess, 85. And it has some ups and downs, but since 2010, it's only been growing. And Europe's share of GDP, world GDP, has gone down. China obviously rose fast, but it has leveled off. So again, we've had the biggest increase in our share of GDP. So how is it that we've been screwed over? I don't quite see it. Is it the idea that we need even more? With 4% of the world's population, 26.3% of global GDP isn't enough, as I said before, if it isn't spread around at least somewhat, we're not going to have anybody to sell anything to. So I think if you're too greedy like Scrooge McDuck, you can drown in your own riches, which I think is kind of what happened to him. Okay, just going to be very brief on this because we have to move on, but this is where I think part of the political problem has come, in that in the early days of this 80-year period, all sectors of our society grew together. But since about 1980, we see the upper 5% has grown much faster in its share of the income gains. And the middle group, the median, and the lower 20th percentile, the lower fifth, has not grown as fast. And why is that? There's several reasons, but and people debate it. One might be our taxation, because even back in the World War II and Eisenhower-Reagan period, the top marginal rate was 69%. That's here, but it's all the way down. So these upper 95th percentile and above that are getting more income out of the total growth are paying less taxes on it. So that's part of the reason. Also, our workers' productivity has continued to go up, but the median family income hasn't kept pace. And so this is what maybe leads certain people to feel resentful, and I don't blame them. But it's not foreigners' fault. It's frankly our own fault. And then if we look, again, we could spend all night going through all the reasons. There are a number of reasons for this. But rather than address those actual reasons, looking at the last point, it's a lot easier to just blame foreigners, including trading partners and immigrants, isn't it? And that's exactly what's happening today. So there's definitely people that I feel have a legitimate gripe, but the gripe is with our domestic policies that have skewed toward the very top income earners and wealth holders. It has not been caused by foreigners or immigrants. Finally, just on this one, we don't have time to go over this in detail. I just have just about the decline of manufacturing. But again, if you look on the right-hand side, as actual, this is employment. Yes, it has gone down, but so is agriculture. I mean, do you realize in 1900, 40% of the U.S. workforce worked in agriculture with hand tools. And, you know, that's what it took to produce the food to feed us. Today, it's between 1% and 2%. Is that a disaster? Should we force those people to go back into farming? Is our farm economy collapsing? If it is, it's not because of not enough people employed. It's because of the collapse of the export markets due to the trade wars. But again, why is manufacturing? Okay, manufacturing is important for military purposes, but if we look at our steel production, it's still very strong. The blue dots are domestic steel. Then on top of that, we do have some import steel, but it's, you know, relatively much less than our domestic steel, which is all of this part. Yes, the jobs in the steel industry have gone down, but so have the man hours per ton of steel gone down. In other words, they're producing more steel with fewer people because of automation. And here's another, this one I have to mention because it's very important. I almost brought a prop. This is called the smiling curve of value components of production. And so this was developed in the 90s. But where is the value added in making things? So as you go up higher, that's more value is added. And when you're down here, that's low value added. So where is the high value added? It's in the basic and applied research and development, the design and the commercialization. And then on this end, that's the front end. The rear end is the marketing, the advertising, brand management, logistics, sales, and after-sales services. These are the two where the value is added, where the money is. This, actually putting the thing together, is the least value added. My prop was going to be a shoe. Brooks shoe I bought recently. I like it a lot. But I pick it up, and you pick it up, it says made in Vietnam. Oh, okay, so is this us being cheated again? Well, the fact is that this is the only part that's done in Vietnam, is pasted together. All the design, all the engineering, the podiatry, and the front end, that's all done in the United States. And the after sales, or sales, marketing, all of that, that's also done in the United States. Vietnam gets very little out of that. Yet we're led to believe, and in the import statistics, that counts as 100% an import. That's how misleading it is. And that's part of the reason we're in the problems we're in. Same with the iPhone. Again, these are all the countries involved in making an iPhone. But again, this is the low value added part. This is taking place in this case in Taiwan, part of it in the United States. But this is also where our Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutwig, said recently, quote, that army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones, that kind of thing is going to come back to America, end quote. Now I ask you, honestly, is that what you want your children and grandchildren to be doing? Screwing in little screws on iPhones? Or would you rather have somebody else do that and have your children and grandchildren involved in the high value added aspects? Again, who makes money when Apple makes an iPad? Yeah, there's some spreading around to different countries, but the overwhelming bulk of it goes to the United States. But yet it comes in, it says made in China, made in Taiwan. But they get very little. This one I'm going to have to pass on, but it just shows you that trade deficits, which are the big bugaboo of the current administration, do not correlate with higher unemployment or with slower GDP growth. Has nothing to do with it. And we benefit, as I mentioned earlier, from tremendous foreign direct investment. Were other nations cheating us by violating WTO rules? Mr. Trump said we lose almost all the lawsuits in the WTO, and that's because we have fewer judges. The system is set up, of course, to take advantage of the United States. Facts were, the United States won almost 90% of the cases it brought as a complainant to the WTO. We won almost every case brought against China that reached the final. Usually they negotiate the dispute away. But if it came to judgment, we won virtually every case against China. We lost as a respondent when other people accused us of cheating. We lost about the same percentage as most other countries. No country had a judge on the panel deciding its cases. But in 2017, Trump blocked the appointment of new judges. And by 2019, the body lacked the minimum number of judges required to hear appeals. So it's kaput. So now there is no dispute resolution. It's just the law of the jungle now. All right, let's look at a positive event. In 2024, while rejecting the foreign policy of the last 80 years a total failure, Mr. Trump promised to end the wars in Ukraine and Gaza within 24 hours of being inaugurated or even before taking office. Ukraine hasn't quite worked out that way. But giving credit where credit is due, the 20-point peace plan has been accepted in part, at least phase one, by Israel and Hamas, leading to a ceasefire and hostage and prisoner exchange. And he has also claimed to have settled 7 additional conflicts ranging across Europe, Asia, and Africa. And to the extent this is true, and to the extent that this Gaza peace plan works out, I will be the first to praise this effort. How did it happen? I think I mentioned before that the new direction of our foreign policy this year has ignored or infuriated most of our traditional allies. However, one exception to that would be Israel. Mr. Trump and his administration were very steadfast supporters of Israel in all their efforts since the attacks on October 7th, two years ago by Hamas. But in recent times, you may have noticed that even among Mr. Trump's supporters, such as Tucker Carlson and others, Marjorie Taylor Greene, there have been dissatisfaction and with the way the war in Gaza was being carried out by Israel. So perhaps because of some shifting opinions within that group, I think it is true that Mr. Trump put pressure on Netanyahu to accept something that he had turned down numerous times in the past. And if so, I'm told on the other side, the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia put pressure on Hamas. And it also may be true that the attacks on Iran has weakened their influence. So that would be another plus for something that has been done this year by the administration. So if Iran's influence with Hamas is less and that of the Gulf states is greater, then they could be pressured by the latter group. Hamas could be pressured into accepting this. And again, we don't know how it's going to work out. There's already Hamas has not agreed to disarm. And I heard just today, I don't want to be too present-minded about it because it's hard to keep up with, but that Hamas people, and I obviously do not approve of this, but they're taking back control of this area that Israel has pulled back to the yellow line, and they're even executing people in the streets. And so that is not a positive sign, obviously. But I'm hoping for the best, and if so, credit needs to be given where credit is due. However, overall, one thing that we have heard at times, and this is a question, would we consider Mr. Trump an isolationist? Some have said that. I think it's not, obviously it's not the case. But he did use that slogan, America First, which was the same slogan as the interwar period isolationists used, such as Charles Lindbergh. He also wanted to build a wall around the United States. Respect for America has plummeted in a majority of nations. You could start with Canada. Surveys show that about 10% of his supporters are true isolationists. But his disdain and attacks on our longtime allies, dismissal of multilateralist organizations and agreements, and telling China and Russia they can do whatever the hell they want, this sort of indicates maybe isolationist tendencies. However, also another isolationist aspect is the total dismantling of our soft power initiatives. That's things like foreign aid. So the pretty much destruction of USAID, Agency for International Development, massive cuts to global health funding, shutting down the Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, dismantling educational exchanges such as the Fulbright Hays, gutting the numbers of foreign students studying in the United States, and eliminating diplomacy-focused institutions such as the U.S. Institute for Peace, National Endowment for Democracy. By the way, do you know how much was spent on these things in the last fiscal year? Our soft power, our what's called foreign aid, not counting military aid. It was $40 billion. That's less than 1% of our total budget, but still $40 billion could be a lot of money. How much money did Mr. Trump and his Treasury Secretary, Bessent, just send to Argentina to prop up their currency? 20 billion, one half to one country to support one leader that happens to support Mr. Trump, spending fully half of our entire foreign aid budget, which has now been gutted. Some, rather than isolationist, perhaps Mr. Trump seeks a return to 19th century great power politics. So this would focus on spheres of influence. So in this, Putin can have Europe, China can have Asia, or at least East Asia, and we'll take over Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal. Oh, also Gaza. Well, that's not right in our sphere of influence. But he's telling Russia and China they can do what they want, showing disdain for all multilateral agreements, international law. You know, our trade with Mexico and Canada was governed by the successor to NAFTA. NAFTA was phased out in Mr. Trump's first term, but it was replaced with the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement. It wasn't hugely different, but it had rules. And yeah, there was still some tariffs in there and, adjustments of various kinds, but he has just totally renounced that. And that was, and he said that was some stupid president before me that entered into that. He's the one that entered into it. And he called it one of the greatest agreements of all time at the time. I'm not trying to just pick on somebody, but these are contradictions that perhaps you can straighten me out on and see where I'm going wrong with these. But that's the disdain for multilateral agreements that even he made earlier. Transactional approach with other nations. It's all about deal making. And using tariffs as a club. And that is definitely what is going on. And you can't hurt people with tariffs. There's no doubt about it. So I threatened Brazil and in fact impose a 50% tariff on everything from Brazil because they're prosecuting the former President Bolsonaro for treason, for trying to overturn the most recent election. And Mr. Trump said, I'm going to slap a 50%. Now, how is that even legal? I don't know that it is, but we don't have time to go into there's a couple of things that he's trying to rely on in the trade legislation, but that will hopefully be sorted out in the courts. They've started already. But there's my little cartoon on that one. Thank you. This is the world. Thanks for this exclusive feast. What's for dinner? That's the eagle, that's the dragon, that's the bear. Yeah, you don't want that kind of dinner invitation. But is that the world? Is that the new vision? Is this the new road we're going down? Certainly his approach to foreign trade mirrors the mercantilism of the former great power imperialists. So they're pursuing economic nationalism, trying to get maximum possible positive trade balance, views trade as a zero-sum game. Again, which I mentioned before, it isn't. It's an expanding sum game. And why is it? Again, I'll give you one final example, and then we'll go to the questions here. We're almost done. But, when I first went to China in 1981, I can tell you they had nothing. They were trying to grow wheat in the north of the country, and they had their, frankly, little bundles. And they brought them out to the road and threw them on the road for the tourist buses to drive over to thrash them. That's how they did it. And similarly so when they set up the first factories, often with equipment that was 40, 50 years old that had been discarded by Europe and the United States. That's what the kind of equipment they had. And the girls came in from the countryside to work on these machines. But the girls in the countryside, what was their productivity? In many cases, it was close to zero or even negative. In other words, they didn't grow enough rice to even feed themselves and their own family. So their productivity was like zero. Now they get in the city, they're working on a machine. What's their productivity now? It's still not great, but it's infinitely more than it was on the rice paddy. And they know that, and that's why they're there. They weren't drafted. They went there because even if they're getting paid $1 or $2 a day, that's way more. And they could not only live on that, they could send a significant portion back to their parents and grandparents on the farm. See, they're more productive. Their labor is producing more. You know, the first tool ever made by a human ancestor, we think, was probably about 2 million years ago. So that's the very first little primitive tool that was made out of a stone 2 million years ago. Today, total value of everything that we have made is, I'm sure it's over $500 trillion. That's productivity, that's work. We went from nothing to 500 trillion by increasing our productivity. So that's how you improve your prosperity. It's not a zero-sum game, it's an expanding, whoops, I almost broke the microphone. Expanding sum game. You want it to expand, then there's more for everybody. And these are the Trump tariffs just since coming back. You can see the darker the country, Brazil hit very hard, India. Again, I'm sorry, maybe you can tell me. We're trying to use India as a bulwark against Chinese expansion in the Indo-Pacific. And so in order to get India on our side, we slap a 50% tariff on everything. And what does Modi, the leader, do? He then goes to the summit in Beijing. Personal profit, I have to mention it. It's not my biggest problem, but his companies did get $160 million in payments from foreign governments. That's his golf courses, hotels. He has over 500 companies, I have read. Most recently, the cryptocurrency, World Liberty Financial, sold $2 billion in bitcoins to the United Arab Emirates government. 2 weeks later, the government received previously denied permission to buy advanced AI chips from NVIDIA. And there's the Qatari jet. And all of a sudden, in return, Qatar, which he had denounced a few years ago as a terrorist state, is given permission to build a training facility on a U.S. Air Force base in Idaho. So we do see a new direction. We do see a new road. The Crossroads, at least for now, has been passed. And our leadership role in defending the existing borders of sovereign nations within a rule-based order has been negated. Seems to devolve to the principle of might makes right. Great powers do as they please, and the smaller powers suffer. Abandons the efforts to build strategic, economic, scientific, and cultural independence. I didn't talk about the gutting of our scientific establishment, but also rubbishes longstanding friends and allies as rip-off artists and/or parasites, erects nationalist walls against everything foreign, apparently to build an autarkic state bent on expansion, Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, etc. So is this a new golden age as we have been promised, or are we repeating mistakes from the far past? That's the question, and that's, I think, how I will wrap things up for today. So we have to think about, I've tried to set out what path we were on earlier. We came to a crossroads. We've chosen apparently a different path. How do we deal with that? That's a very good question. Thank you very much.
Ryan, if you'll bring the microphone around to the people who raised their hands, that we have one over here to start off with.
I used to buy soybeans frozen at Woodlake Market, and they were delicious. And I think they should, can you hear this? Sure. I think we could eat a lot more soybeans. They're fabulous. Salt and pepper and butter. That's what I have to say.
Okay. There's a lot of them out there in those fields.
So when this quagmire is over and we have a new administration in place, how are we ever going to get any country or corporation to ever trust us again?
That's, oh gosh, now look what I've done. And now I'll be electrocuted. I'm sorry. I guess they used to call that the $64,000 question, when that was big money. Chump change now, but yeah, trust once lost is very hard to regain. And I ran across a quote from, I can't remember this, it was a statesman in Europe, though, an official of a European government, that said, yeah, we have to strike out on our own. We can no longer be dependent on how somebody votes every 4 years in Wisconsin. I don't think they're trying to insult Wisconsin. They're saying this is a swing state. And if it can swing that wildly, how can we rely on this anymore? So, yeah, I would have to, I don't enjoy saying this, and I'm one who thinks most things can be fixed. But, and I think it could be fixed. But it's hard, because once you lose the trust, if they could do this once, they could do it again. So I think it's a really big problem.
I have a question, or a comment maybe. My nephew works in international sales for Porsche Company. He's a German citizen, and he's worked for them for quite a few years. I just talked to him this last week. A month before, he had said to me, when he came to the United States, these tariffs are just going to mean that Porsche is not going to send anything to the United States because they won't put up with the tariffs. This time when he talked to me, he said, guess what? Porsche is going to build a plant in Georgia, and then they'll not have to worry about tariffs. But it's going to take 7 years, and this is in direct response to your question. It's going to take 7 years, he said, to complete the plant. So they're concerned that what's happening now, Professor, is going to continue. I mean, Trump's there for 4 years, and after that, what's going to happen? But they're concerned that this isn't just a short-term thing. You know, what do they do? So they are responding to it.
Well, I think that's an argument that is made by the administration, that that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to force foreign companies to invest in the United States. But I think the reason I don't agree with that is, first of all, as I pointed out, foreign companies were already investing in the United States at a higher rate than any other country. And it's trade that actually encourages that. So again, if they're importing a lot or exporting from their country a lot of their product, then at some point it becomes obviously beneficial for them. Now, and so you could try to force them to do that through tariffs, and that sounds like it's working partially there. But what's the cost to the overall economy for all those years before that gets going? Again, because of the tariffs, we have to pay higher prices because our domestic producers will also raise their prices. This is 100% predictable because they don't have competition now. The competition has been disadvantaged by this tax on the top of their price. So I can, without any cost to me, I can raise the price of my product and get more profit. And who loses? The consumer. The other thing I'd like to mention is, this hatred of foreign cars. And frankly, I happen to drive one. Okay. But I also know that Zimbrick BMW in Madison employs hundreds of people. It's a thriving business. And they also have Mercedes and probably Porsche, and they have VW, they have all of them. And by the way, they're not the only ones. Bergstrom in Appleton has all those too. They're employing together thousands and thousands of people. And so they're not, it's a big plus to our economy to have those companies. And again, I'm not trying to take cheap shots, but when you have a situation like down in Georgia, where I believe it was Samsung, wasn't it, was building a plant, and the administration sicks ice on them, and they arrested, 250 Korean workers who were just there setting up the plant. Then they were going to go home, and it was going to employ Georgians or people from that region in the day-to-day running of it. But they had to have people that understood their technology and their patents and everything, their way of doing things, to set up the plant. And all of a sudden we send in a crew to arrest them. How is that encouraging the sort of thing that is supposed to be being encouraged? So first of all, again, not consistent, inconsistent, chaotic. Where's the predictability? You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't have a private business myself, but if I did, and I frankly, I talk to many people that do, including, as I mentioned, Alliance Laundry, Mercury Marine, other manufacturers. The other thing I would mention in connection with that is, again, this desire to bring back manufacturing jobs. What I know is from looking at Alliance Laundry, and I'm not sure how it is around here, but in the Fox Valley, every single factory that I go past, and there's hundreds of them, every single one has outside, we're hiring. And nationally, the figures I saw just the other day, we are short 600,000 employees in our manufacturing industries. The jobs are there, and these are good jobs. Alliance Laundry starts $25 an hour plus benefits. Work a 4-day week, 4 10-hour shifts. And I just heard our economic development director earlier this week, yesterday in fact, she said that in Fond du Lac County, the average annual salary in our manufacturing industries in Fond du Lac County is $74,000 a year. Now, that includes the engineers but that's the average. I don't think that's bad. So a lot of this is, frankly, in my opinion, smoke and mirrors, and it's obviously misguided. That's what I think.
To jump on the point of the Porsche coming back, and it's going to take 7 years, right? They're still going to be importing a lot of the parts from overseas. So that's coming in. So the overall Porsche price coming from the United States is going to be probably $10,000 more from getting it from over there. So again, going back to Marty, it's smoke and mirrors. You're bullying people to make a manufacturing plant here for what? For more jobs? We just heard there's plenty of manufacturing jobs out there. It's really all that to me is just it's making people confused. It's continuing the confusion, continuing to, and nobody really has any set plans. And large businesses are going to make decisions on global terms. What is going on in the global markets? They're not just going to be focused on one market. So I don't know what that all that, oh, yeah, we're gonna build one in the United States, 7 years, great. How is that gonna help now in the turmoil right now, So I just wanted to put that point out.
Thank you, and I think it's a very good point. And again, I would underline the fact there's no such thing as an American car. You look at it, there's parts from all over the world. That iPhone example I gave you, there's over 30 countries contribute in the making of an iPhone. So to try to be pure, again, that would be autarky, and our standard of living would be cut by at least a quarter, if not even more, if we were to go to that. Yes?
In your opinion, is there ever a good time for any kind of a tariff? Are tariffs ever used?
Sure.
That they can be good?
And
Could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, I had that in my notes, but I just didn't have time. No, I am not up here trying to argue for pure free trade. It's never existed. Even before Mr. Trump took office, our import and export laws covered 2.3 million different products. So it's very complicated. And there are reasons, obviously strategic reasons. So you don't want to export things that could help a potential adversary militarily or perhaps even economically. So that's perfectly reasonable. So no, I'm not up here arguing for total free trade. It's never existed. It will never exist. And in my notes I said at least not in my lifetime. But that's not saying much. I was trying to get a laugh. But no, seriously, I don't want to read it over, but I understand what you're saying. Okay, I'll give you another example. Now, I don't happen to think this is a good example. But you realize there's tariffs tied to quotas on sugar imported in the United States. This is even before Trump. This goes back decades. And so what that means is only a certain amount of sugar can come in at a market price from the Caribbean, wherever they have advantage of making sugar. And then the tariff that kicks in. What it amounts to is that we here in America pay double the world market price for sugar. When you go into the supermarket, I know it's still pretty cheap, but we're paying double. And that's why there's what's it called? High fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup. That's why that's in everything, because that's way cheaper, because we have to pay an inflated price for sugar. Now, why do we do that? It's political. It's pressure by sugar farmers in certain parts of the country, and it could be beet sugar or cane sugar. In the southern, Louisiana, places like that. And they had powerful Congress people at times. And they got that written in there, and then they log roll. And they say, oh, you let me keep this, and then I'll give you some protection for your products, whatever that may be, in another state. And we do a lot of things that aren't market-oriented. And there's a complaint against Canada that they do discriminate against our dairy imports. And that actually is true. But again, why do they do that? Because their voters demand it. And when you get to agriculture in general, there's a lot of protections going on because we need food to survive. And a lot of it is perishable. So we do want to protect our food supply. So some of that's understandable. And in Canada, the dairy industry, they don't want to see the dairy industry disappear. So they protect it from foreign competition. On the other hand, I also have worked with Grande Cheese out of our county and surrounding counties. And one of their biggest money makers is selling dehydrated or powdered milk to Mexico. They make millions of dollars a year from that. But they won't if reciprocal tariffs, retaliatory tariffs are put on products like that by Mexico in retaliation for what the administration is trying to impose on them. So you've added a nice layer of complexity to this that is most definitely there. But again, our dairy industry is not market run. Perhaps you remember that there's something, it's called price supports. And the price level that the government will not let milk price go below used to be set by how close or far you were from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They changed that more recently, but so that's how the California milk industry really got going, because they got a higher price, because the government would buy their milk to the point of driving up the price based on what was considered to be their distance from the dairy center of the United States, Eau Claire. So there's a lot of complexities here. Some of them are necessary, some of them aren't. Some of them are there because of political pressure, probably in some cases even corruption. Something passes beneath the table. But again, as I said, you added a good layer of complexity to this trade situation.
Now, I think we have time for the one more question that we handed the microphone over there.
I guess we're going back to the tariff thing. So what would you recommend if you have foreign nations that charge U.S. tariffs? We're trying to get that situation to take care of, make it more, let's say, balanced. How do you recommend making that a little more fair trade? Like you say, we can't have fair trade, but how would you recommend we do that moving forward?
Well, I would start by reducing tariffs back down to what they were on January 1st of this year, or even lower. But to go, I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the average tariff before, January of this year was 2.7%, and now it's almost 20%. That's the highest level of tariffs we've seen since the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which every economist considers a disaster, of the early 1930s. So now, in terms of trade balance, is that your concern, that we might?
Concerned with the reverse side of the trade, where we're sending it overseas and getting tariff or VAT taxed if you send to Europe. How do you eliminate that side of it, or do we just not? We just accept
That's what the World Trade Organization was trying to do until they destroyed it.
They're trying to balance it? Is that what you're saying? They're trying to bring that down?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Okay, we send over a car, a Ford, goes to France, which I think we can't even sell them in France, but let's say we pretend to do that. Do we then, let's say Ford wants to reduce their amount of tax that they're setting for an import tax to France. So, is that what that organization is supposed to help with? Balance out
It's supposed to set rules that are fair.
How many years was that going on for?
Well, really, since the end of World War II, it was originally called GATT, and then it became the WTO in, I believe, 2002, and it existed up until the first Trump administration basically destroyed it. And I will say Biden did nothing to revive it. Now, again, are you concerned about the bilateral trade balance, that we might buy more from Canada than what they buy from us? Is that what you're concerned with?
It is not the imbalance of what we buy from anybody else. I'm saying the, I guess, equilibrium that you cause with, Europe has never wanted to allow a tax on any cheese that they send to us or any wine that we would send here. So therefore, with this chaos that we cause, is causing a disturbance where now they're allowing it to be sent here with a tax on it, and then it's trying to balance it out. Do you see how possibly chaos can cause an equilibrium that can happen, and then eventually we get to almost free trade throughout the world, that we're trying to be more altruistic or more balanced or whatever you have?
Well, I would like that. But again, here I would have to say that the way this has been approached, even since the 1920s, it wasn't called reciprocal, because that's too hard. I told you we had 2.3 million things in our trade codes. And we're trying to make that the same, 2.3 million with every other country? No. So instead, they went with what's called most favored nation. Have you heard that phrase? Most favored nation. What that means is I, as an importer, will not put more of a tax on your goods than I put on the one I put the least on. You'll get the same treatment as my most favored nation. So that means there's no discrimination. Now, if I'm in India and I, for religious reasons, want a high tariff on imported beef, for religious reasons, I can do that. But I can't have a 50% tax on American beef and no tax on Australian beef. If whatever country I have the lowest tariff on for beef, I have to extend that to everybody. Then I'm not discriminating. And we have already, even before the Trump administration, first or second, there were tariffs on European wine and cheese. Pretty significant. I don't know exactly how much, but no, we were always paying already a pretty big tariff on those. Why is that? That's to protect our producers. But as long as we didn't, have a higher tariff on Italian wine than we did on French wine, although you could have it more on champagne because it's a sparkling wine and it's a different category. So, it is very complicated, but those are the things I would consider. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you, Professor,
Okay.
for your presentation.